in strong support of the Endless Frontier Act, a long overdue bipartisan effort to invest in our country's innovation and competitiveness. I'm pleased to see that Congress is finally taking action to shore up U.S. investment in the research, development, and manufacturing of critical technologies. Because without this kind of intervention, China, in particular, will continue to outpace and outperform us in the global technology race, impacting our country's economic well-being, our global influence, and our national security. And let me note, when I reference China, I think it's important that any policymaker or business leader draw this distinction. I want to make clear that my beef is with the Communist Party of China and the policies of President Xi Jinping, which persecutes its own people in terms of the Uyghurs, restricts the freedom of the people of Hong Kong, creates a surveillance state that would make George Orwell blush. My beef is with those policies and that party, not with the Chinese people, and obviously not with the Chinese diaspora, particularly Chinese Americans, Asian Americans. But in recent years, China has rapidly been executing on a plan, working particularly to ramp up its domestic industries around technology that confer potentially to them long-term strategic dominance in a whole host of industries that traditionally the United States or the West has dominated. One of the topics I'm going to come back to in a moment is semiconductors. China consistently increases its investment in semiconductor industry with a commitment to invest $150 billion and a goal to produce at least 70% of the semiconductors it consumes as one of the world's fastest growing economies by 2030. And frankly, on this issue of semiconductors, it's not just China. Look around at South Korea, which has pledged to invest over $130 billion over the next 9 years, while training 36,000 new microelectronics engineers and technicians. Even our allies in Europe, Germany, and 18 other EU members recently announced investments of up to $60 billion in key hardware like semiconductors over the next few years. If we look back and see how we're doing in America, by contrast, over the past 10 years, only 17 major semiconductor fabs or foundries, these are basically the manufacturing facilities, have built in the United States, while we've seen over 122 built elsewhere. Matter of fact, right now, there's not a single new fabrication facility being constructed in America. Matter of fact, the total number of facilities, fabs, foundries that are in production has gone from 81 down to 76. As some of our older fabrication facilities, frankly, the technology has leaped forward, and if you don't continue to make the investment, you end up with a large empty facility. We even have one right outside of Richmond in Henrico County. As a country, our share of semiconductor and microelectronic production has gone from 37% to just 12% today. And if you look at China, it's almost the exact inverse, going from single digits to north of 30%. Now, truth is, in the United States, the cost of a new fab is about 25 to 50% higher, partially because of the lower financial incentives we provide, the appropriate environmental standards. But it does mean that without incentives, we're not going to be in the game. Right now, partially because of decisions made in advance, right at the beginning of COVID, partly just because of a semiconductor shortage, we have auto factories sitting idle in the United States, not because they don't have workers, not because they don't have demand for those automobiles, but because these plants can't obtain the semiconductors that are integral to automobiles and, for that matter, every device we operate. On the same time, if we look back again at China, it has no plans to take the foot off the pedal anytime soon. Matter of fact, Last year, President Xi Jinping announced a $1.4 trillion commitment to develop new technologies just through 2025, 1.4 trillion. We think about the numbers we're talking about here today, which are big based upon traditional American standards, but they pale in comparison to what China is investing. And you don't need to look very far. You only need to look at the Chinese documents themselves, the China Made in China 2025 plan or the China 2035 plan in terms of standards and procedures and protocols, to see where beyond semiconductors and 5G and some of the things I've talked about in the past, there's a host of other areas that if we don't invest, we're not going to be able to stay ahead. Now, it's not all bleak. U.S. semiconductor firms in areas like lithography, packaging, and meteorology still lead the world. The machining, we still lead. However, many of the key ingredients to our success, including federal support for R&D, investment in basic research, and support for advanced manufacturing, have actually declined over the last 20 years. Simply put, we're just not keeping up. Between 1995 and 2018, Chinese R&D investment increased by over 15% per year, compared to the United States increases of averaging about 3% growth per year. Now, we started with a higher base, acknowledge that, but on relative and shortly on actual real terms, China will soon pass. Matter of fact, after World War II, the United States funded 69% of the annual global R&D. Today, we fund less than 28%, with only 7% going to non-defense technologies. Again, like wireless, something that I know a little bit about and we'll speak to it again in a moment. To get back to where we once were and reassert United States technology leadership, we need to reprioritize foundational technologies to maintain not just our country's economic leadership, but to also make sure that our values are built in to these increasing technology areas. The truth is, for so many years, not only did we invent many of these breakthrough technologies here, even if we didn't invent them in the United States, we would then set the rules, the procedures, the protocols, the standards around these new technology development. We've seen that in semiconductors for a long time. We saw it in computing. We saw it in the internet. We saw it in wireless. We saw it in satellites. But time and again now, we're suddenly seeing China flood the zone of these standard-setting bodies. And when you set the standards, you also reflect your values. So values that we bring to the table, like transparency, like respect for human rights, those go out the window when China sets the rules around 5G that basically allows traffic to always pass through Beijing, even if you're making a phone call between St. Louis and San Francisco. Why does that traffic have to be routed through Beijing unless there's malicious interest at stake? If you set the rules, you drive not only the technology advancement, but you drive so many other things. Now, as chairman of the Senate Committee on Intelligence, I have long been banging the drum about the way that the PRC has taken advantage of what makes our country and economic system so great: our openness, our transparency, our free markets. The Chinese government, unfortunately, plays by a different set of rules. The Chinese government starts with the willingness to use all the tools of its intelligence services, sometimes its student population that has added so much value to our country, in enormous thefts of intellectual property. Some public estimates are north of $500 billion a year. The Chinese government as well is using all aspects of its society to increase China's dominance, from the intellectual property theft that I've talked about, to opaque subsidies, and financing that always favors a Chinese vendor. And unfortunately, for many of our trading partners, the deal that is offered by the Chinese firm is often either too good or linked to another development. I'm going to build you a road, I'm going to build you a port, but you got to buy Huawei as the price of that. or because we in America, or for that matter, even the West, have not kept up on a financing basis. That's why in the Endless Frontiers bill that we are debating right now, a bill that will make substantial investments to the National Science Foundation and the Department of Energy, our national labs, both great national assets. In this bill as well, we're actually doing more than authorizing new ideas and new advancements. We're actually finally putting our money where our mouth is. That's why included in the Endless Frontier bill is the Utilizing Strategic Allied U.S. Telecommunications Act, which at the end of the day is basically $2 billion to invest in making sure that in America we have, and in the West, we have a competitor against Huawei. I've come into this floor and talked a lot about the national security threat Huawei presents in America, and for that matter, to our allies. But if you don't have a competitor priced on a fair basis, what do you expect to do? What do you expect of an allied country to do? Or for that matter, what do you expect many of the rural telcos' decision, which was to buy Huawei equipment until this vulnerability got exposed? On this bill, I was proud to work with two of my great partners on the Intel Committee, Senator Richard Burr and Senator Marco Rubio. What we do with this $2 billion is put up a public wireless supply chain innovation fund to spur investments towards open architecture, innovative leap-ahead technologies in our domestic mobile market. And what we're really talking about doing, and I know I've talked to the presiding officer about this and others, is, in 5G, we're almost so far behind at this point that we've got to leapfrog ahead. Well, one way we can leapfrog ahead is by developing what's called Open RAN, or Open Radio Access Network. What does that mean in English? Well, it means let's move away from the traditional hardware-based stack of a telephone wireless system and move to a more software-based system. When we do that, we get away from the inherent advantages that the Chinese and Huawei have, and we move to an area where there are a host of American and other enterprises that are software-based, where we are already far ahead. Now, what we've got to also do as well is combine this investment, and we've got close to $500 million on this, to also invest in a multilateral fund. The truth is, no single American company on its own can take on this enormous challenge that the whole Chinese state backing their Chinese champion. There's no way we can take that on our own. So how do we think with our other democratic allies around the world, the G7, but also countries like South Korea and Taiwan and Singapore and India and Israel and others, that we can collaborate on this technology development, think about how we compete on an economic basis, and at the same time make sure that we install those values around transparency, respect for human rights, notion of an open and competitive system, that those are built in to technology development. Second item is this. Crucially, this bill also addresses the essential need for us to invest in semiconductors. We are finally putting our money where our mouth is. This bill will appropriate on an emergency basis $52 billion for investment in chips in our country and along with our allies. This basically builds upon legislation that we added to the Defense Authorization Bill last year. It's bipartisan. Senator Cornyn, Senator Schumer, Senator Cotton, Senator Kelly are all working together on this with a host of others. Because the semiconductor industry, while we've seen some sliding, still represents one of the shining lights of our country's innovation economy. And as a wider array of products and services depend on internet connectivity and software processing, the demand for semiconductors has only grown. But as I outlined at the top, unfortunately, that leadership position we've had for so long is at stake. So the CHIPS Act, which is now baked into the Endless Frontier Act, directs and empowers key agencies like the Department of Commerce, in consultation with others like our intelligence community, to make investments in microelectronics R&D a priority. It emphasized the need for multilateral efforts with our allies and close trading partners to bring greater transparency and accountability to subsidies. It aligns policies towards non-transparent, non-market competitors like the Chinese. And it makes sure that we have concerted and coordinated action both domestically and again with our allies on supply chain security and integrity. It invests billions in basic research related to advanced semiconductors via DoD and a newly created National Semiconductor Technology Center. And it makes an unprecedented investment in trying to build new foundries, fabs, basic manufacturing facilities here in the United States, so we have that secure supply chain for the future. That $39 billion in that fund, I believe, will help us build 7 to 10 new fabs right here in the United States. And whether they're in the presiding officer state or Virginia or elsewhere, our states will have to invest as well. Many of these facilities cost anywhere from $12 to $15 billion by the time you build them and keep them operating till they hit some level of profitability. So some level of American national investment in each of these is needed to make sure that at least some of these will be built in the United States. And again, the $39 billion should generate 7 to 10 new fabs over the next 5 to 7 years. And whether it's chips for automotive, aerospace, biomedical, our cell phones, you name it, the billions of Internet of Things devices almost all rely upon semiconductors. Let's make sure those chips are built, designed, and produced here, and that those elsewhere in the world are often done in countries that are allies. So the Endless Frontier Act, which includes both the investment in 5G and O-RAN, and obviously the semiconductors, serves as a once-in-a-generation opportunity to solidify United States leadership in science and tech innovation. It'll strengthen our national security and reinvigorate American ingenuity. Truth is, colleagues on both sides of the aisle, I know are supportive of these efforts. I hope next week that we pass this bill with a massive majority. Then it will be quickly acted upon by the House, because I know our domestic industries are watching us. I know our adversaries are as well. And it will be wonderful if we can finally move beyond simply talking about the challenges that China presents and actually make the kind of tangible investments that American generations in the past have made. With that, Madam President, I yield the floor and note the absence of a quorum.